It was a cool autumn evening when Elena received the message that would change her life. She was sitting by the old window of her small apartment, practicing a few soft notes on her worn-out piano. The sound was faint, almost like a whisper. The piano had scratches on its wood and one of the keys didn't work properly, but it was her most precious possession. It once belonged to her father, who used to play for her when she was little. That evening her phone buzzed. It was a message from the local music academy where she sometimes helped younger students learn basic piano. The message read, "Elena, we're organizing a charity concert next week. One of the performers canceled. Would you be willing to play something simple? Just a short piece." She read it twice. Her heart started to race. A concert? At the city's grand music hall? She had never performed in front of a big audience. Not like that. Her hands trembled as she typed a reply. "I can try. A simple piece, right?" She pressed send and stared at the message, her reflection glowing faintly in the phone screen. That night, she couldn't sleep. The thought of performing filled her with both excitement and fear. She had always played in small gatherings, school events, local recitals, and sometimes at her neighbor's cafe. But this was different. This was real. There would be critics, teachers, musicians, people dressed in suits and gowns. She imagined their faces watching her every move, every note. Her mind was full of questions. Why me? She thought. I'm not special. There are so many better pianists. But deep inside, a tiny spark of pride glowed. Someone believed she could do it. The next morning she visited the academy. The hallway smelled faintly of wood polish and music sheets. The event organizer, a tall man named Mr. Dawson, met her in the rehearsal room. He smiled warmly. "Elena," he said, shaking her hand. "Thank you for agreeing on such short notice. We just need something light and pleasant. Maybe a folk tune or a short classical piece. Nothing too heavy. The audience will love it." She nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course," she said. "Something simple." But as she left the academy, his words echoed in her mind. Something simple. Elena didn't know why those words made her uneasy. Music to her was never simple. Every melody she played carried a piece of her heart, a story of her life. Even a gentle tune held emotion, if you played it with truth. That evening, she sat again at her old piano. She tried a few well-known tunes, cheerful waltzes, light melodies, little songs that made people smile. But something inside her refused to settle. None of them felt right. She stopped playing and rested her head on the piano keys, feeling the cool surface under her skin. She closed her eyes and remembered her father. He used to tell her, "Music doesn't come from your fingers, my little one. It comes from your heart. The piano is just the bridge." Elena smiled faintly at the memory. She missed him. He had passed away when she was 16, but his voice still lived inside her every time she played. Over the next few days, she practiced constantly. She went to work at the bookstore in the mornings and returned home to the piano in the evenings. Her small apartment filled with music and the sound of her quiet humming. Sometimes she made mistakes, stopped, and laughed softly to herself. Other times, she sat in silence, just staring at the piano, lost in thought. Her best friend, Mia, dropped by one evening. "You look tired," she said, handing Elena a cup of coffee. Elena smiled. "I'm okay. I just want to find the right tune." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Didn't they ask you to play something simple?" "Yes," Elena said, looking at the piano, "but maybe simple doesn't mean meaningless." Mia chuckled. "You always take things so seriously, but I like that about you." They both laughed, and for a moment the room felt light again. But as soon as Mia left, Elena sat back at the piano and touched the keys softly. The night outside was quiet. She began playing slow, gentle notes. Nothing planned, just her feelings flowing out. It was sad, beautiful, and alive. She didn't know it yet, but that small moment, that quiet melody born from her heart, would become the foundation of what she would later play at the concert. When the day of the event finally arrived, she received her invitation letter. The gold-embossed card read, "You are invited to perform at the City Grand Hall Charity Gala, 7 p.m." She held the letter close, feeling her chest tighten with both joy and fear. She placed it carefully on her piano and whispered to herself, "This is it, Papa. I'll play for you." That evening she stood by the window again, looking at the city lights. The reflection of the piano glowed softly behind her. She thought about how far she had come, from a shy student to a performer invited to a real concert. She knew people expected something light and simple, but her heart had already decided otherwise. It wasn't about proving herself. It wasn't about fame. It was about telling her story through music, the only way she knew how. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet promise rising. When she sat at that grand piano, she wouldn't just play a simple tune. She would pour her soul into every note. The week before the concert felt heavier than Elena expected. People around her kept saying, "Don't worry, it's just a small piece." But to her, nothing about it felt small. Every day, she woke up with that same thought pressing on her heart. I must play something simple. Yet the more she thought about it, the more impossible it felt. At the music academy, other performers were busy rehearsing grand, complex pieces. She could hear them through the open practice room doors. Fast, powerful piano runs, sweeping violin notes, singers hitting high notes with confidence. She would quietly pass by with her sheet music folder held close, feeling like a child among giants. Her teacher, Mrs. Carter, noticed her unease. "Elena, you look worried," she said one afternoon. Elena smiled weakly. "I'm just trying to keep it simple." Mrs. Carter chuckled softly. "Sometimes simple is the hardest thing, my dear. When there's nothing to hide behind, every note shows who you are." Those words stayed with her. Every note shows who you are. That evening, she returned home and sat at her piano. The keys looked different now, like they were quietly watching her. She placed her fingers gently and began to play a soft folk song. The melody was pleasant but empty, like a smile that didn't reach the eyes. She stopped, sighed, and leaned back. Her apartment was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. She thought about the audience she would face. Hundreds of eyes, expecting something cheerful and light. She imagined herself sitting there, playing a song that didn't mean anything to her, and the thought made her chest ache. She wanted to make them feel something. She wanted to make herself feel something. But the moment she thought that, guilt washed over her. The invitation had been clear, just a short, simple tune. If she tried to turn it into something grand, wouldn't that be selfish? Wouldn't that be breaking the promise she made? That night, Elena dreamed of her father again. He was sitting at the old piano, playing a slow, emotional tune. She was a little girl, sitting beside him, watching his hands move. When he stopped, he turned to her and said, "Don't be afraid to play what you feel. Music isn't rules, it's truth." When she woke up, the dream clung to her like a shadow. She walked straight to the piano, still in her pajamas, and began to play what she remembered from the dream. The melody was tender but strong, like a quiet voice standing up for itself. She played it again and again until the notes started to flow naturally. It wasn't planned. It wasn't written down. But it was hers. Each day, she added more to it. Small changes, little flourishes, moments of silence between notes that felt like breathing. She didn't even realize she was composing something new. It just happened. But with every passing day, the fear grew too. "What if they hate it?" she whispered to herself one night. "What if I'm not good enough?" Her best friend Mia came over again, bringing takeout food and a smile. "Still practicing?" Elena nodded. "I can't stop thinking about it. They told me to play something easy, but I think I'm making it too complicated." Mia laughed. "You always do that. You turn everything into art." Elena grinned, though her eyes looked tired. "Maybe I should just play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and be done with it." Mia rolled her eyes. "No, you were born to make people feel. Play what's in your heart. not what they expect. After Mia left, Elena sat in the dark for a long time. The city lights outside shimmered like tiny stars, and she wondered if every musician in history had felt this same fear, the fear of being seen, truly seen, through their art. She closed her eyes and started to play her new melody again. But this time, something inside her cracked open. The music changed. It became more emotional, more alive. Her hands trembled, yet she didn't stop. She played until tears rolled down her cheeks. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about honesty. By the end of the week, she had something she couldn't even name. Not a song, not a sonata, but a piece of her size, and sound. She wrote it down roughly, though the notes didn't capture the feeling completely. Every time she played it, it sounded slightly different, as if it breathed. When she met Mr. Dawson again for rehearsal, he asked, "So, Elena, what will you be performing?" She hesitated, clutching her music sheets. "It's something new," she said quietly. "A simple tune, but it might grow a little." He smiled without realizing how serious she was. "As long as the audience enjoys it." She nodded. "They will feel it," she whispered, almost to herself. On her way home, she stopped by a small park. The autumn wind was gentle, carrying the faint scent of rain. She sat on a bench and watched a little girl playing with a leaf, spinning it in her fingers like a dance. There was something so pure, so effortless about it. It reminded her what simplicity truly meant. Not emptiness, but innocence. That night, Elena practiced with her eyes closed, letting her heart lead her fingers. She imagined her father's smile, the grand hall's silence, the way sound can fill a space like light. The weight of simplicity was no longer a burden. It was a test, to see if she could turn something ordinary into something unforgettable. And though no one knew it yet, Elena was about to do exactly that. The night of the concert arrived faster than Elena expected. All week her mind had been spinning with notes, memories, and tiny bursts of fear. But now it was real. The city was alive with golden lights, and the grand music hall stood like a glowing palace against the evening sky. As her taxi pulled up to the entrance, Elena pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. She looked up at the tall building, marble steps, glass doors, and chandeliers that glittered even from the outside. People in elegant clothes walked past her, laughing, talking, their footsteps echoing on the stone flue, where for a moment she felt small, like a single drop in a great sea of confidence and wealth. But then she touched the small pendant around her neck, her father's old music note charm, and whispered, "I belong here too." Inside, the hall was breathtaking. The air smelled of polished wood and perfume. The walls were tall and painted in soft gold, and huge curtains framed the stage like a royal theater. The grand piano sat at the center under the lights, black and gleaming, waiting silently for her touch. She could hear the faint sound of the orchestra rehearsing their last piece before the concert began. Every note seemed perfect, yet it only made her heart beat faster. She felt like a quiet storm trapped in a glass box. Backstage, other performers greeted one another with polite smiles. A few recognized her. "Oh, you're Elena, right? The one filling in for the canceled act?" She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yes, that's me, just a simple tune." They smiled back kindly, but she could feel their curiosity, and maybe a little pity. In the dressing room, she sat in front of the mirror. Her reflection looked different tonight. Nervous, but determined. Her dark dress fit neatly, her hair brushed perfectly, but her eyes gave her away. They were full of questions. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. "Don't think about them," she whispered. "Just play." Mr. Dawson appeared at the door, his clipboard in hand. "Elena, you're up after the cello solo. Are you ready?" She smiled softly. "I think so." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Keep it gentle. The audience loves calm music after strong performances." When he left, she laughed quietly to herself. Calm music, she said under her breath. We'll see. As she waited in the wings, she listened to the cello performance on stage. Deep, emotional, perfect. The hall filled with applause as the piece ended, and she felt her throat tighten. Her heart beat so hard she thought it might shake her fingers before she even touched the piano. Next, Elena Carter. The announcer's voice called. The moment had come. She stepped onto the stage, and the bright lights washed over her like a wave. The audience blurred into soft shapes, hundreds of people in suits and dresses, all watching. She couldn't see their faces clearly, but she could feel their attention, their stillness. Her heels clicked gently on the polished floor as she walked to the piano. Each step echoed like time slowing down. She bowed slightly, then sat. The piano was magnificent, smooth, shining, perfectly tuned. When she placed her fingers on the keys, they felt cool and alive. She paused for a moment, closing her eyes. The air was thick with silence. Then she began. The first notes floated softly into the hall, fragile and quiet, exactly as they had asked for. A simple tune, a lullaby of calmness. Her hands moved gracefully, the melody flowing like water. But inside, her heart was burning. Each note pulled her deeper into the music, into the memories that had shaped it. The sound of her father's laughter, the smell of their small home, the nights she played alone to chase away sadness. She opened her eyes slightly and saw the piano strings vibrating under the light, gold and trembling like the veins of her own heart. She could feel the audience listening closely. Some leaned forward, some closed their eyes. And then, something changed. Her hands, almost by instinct, began to move differently. The melody deepened. The rhythm grew stronger. The simple tune began to breathe with emotion. Soft whispers turning into waves. The music was no longer quiet background noise. It was alive. She wasn't thinking anymore. The piano led her. Her body swayed, her fingers flying from one end to the other, her heart speaking through sound. She could hear gasps from the audience, but she didn't stop. She played as if her soul had waited years for this moment to speak. When the final chord came, it rang through the hall, like a heartbeat echoing into silence. Her hands stayed frozen above the keys. For a second, no one moved. Then, slowly, the applause began. Soft at first, then louder, stronger, rising like thunder. Elena blinked. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. She stood, bowed deeply, and for the first time in her life, she felt free. Not just as a musician, but as a person. Backstage, people stared at her. Some clapped her on the back. Others were speechless. Mr. Dawson approached, his eyes wide. "Elena, that wasn't simple," he said with a stunned smile. She laughed softly, still breathless. "No," she said, "it wasn't." As she sat alone for a moment, still trembling from the rush, she realized something beautiful. She hadn't broken the promise. She had kept it, just in her own way. She had played something simple, but filled it with her truth. And that made all the difference. The lights dimmed slightly, and Elena sat at the grand piano, her hands resting lightly on the cool keys. For a few seconds, she couldn't move. The hall was utterly still, waiting. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. A single soft light shone down on her and the piano. Everything else faded. The audience, the hall, the noise. It was just her and the instrument. Her heart was racing, but her face was calm. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first notes came out so gently that they almost disappeared into the air. They were delicate, fragile, like snowflakes falling on water. The tune was simple, exactly what everyone expected. A small melody, peaceful and graceful. The audience relaxed. Some smiled faintly, others leaned back in their seats, thinking it would be a short, pleasant interlude. But inside, Elena felt something different. Each note touched a memory. Each sound opened a door inside her. The piano's voice felt alive beneath her fingertips. She remembered her father's laughter, her mother humming in the kitchen, the scent of old baie oaks at the store where she worked. Every piece of her life seemed to come together in the music. As she played, she felt her breathing slow, her body melting into rhythm. The soft melody repeated, but she began to add tiny changes. A longer pause here, a gentler touch there, a rising chord that hinted at something deeper. It was no longer just a song, it was a heartbeat. From the stage, she could see faint outlines of faces in the front row. An old woman clasping her hands, a young couple sitting close, a little boy staring wide-eyed. For a moment, she forgot the fear, the pressure, the rules. She wasn't performing anymore. She was speaking, in the only language she truly knew. The simple tune began to grow. The melody curved and stretched, filling the air with warmth. The piano sang louder now, but not harshly. It was like sunlight breaking through clouds, soft, golden, full of hope. Her fingers moved faster, lighter, stronger. She didn't look at the keys. She didn't need to. Her hands knew the path, guided by emotion, not by thought. The music began to shift from gentle to passionate, every note dancing with energy, every chord pulsing like life itself. The audience leaned forward. They could feel the change. Something real was happening. The girl they expected to play a simple background tune was creating something far greater, something alive. Elena's heart pounded as the melody climbed higher. It was as if all her emotions, joy, pain, loneliness, love, were rising together, reaching for something unseen. Her body swayed with the rhythm, her hair falling across her face, her hands glowing in the soft stage light. She remembered her father again, his voice, his music, his faith in her. She felt tears burning in her eyes but kept playing. She could almost hear him whispering, "Play what you feel, my little one." And she did. The music shifted again, slowing, softening, as if catching its breath. She played a few notes so tender they seemed to tremble in the air. The hall was silent. No one coughed. No one moved. Every ear and every heart was listening. She felt like time had stopped. There was no yesterday, no tomorrow, only the sound of the piano, echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet hall. Then, without thinking, she let the music rise one last time. It grew like a wave, stronger, brighter, fuller. The melody soared through the hall, wrapping around everyone, filling every corner, every empty space. By now, the simple tune was gone. What filled the air was something else, a living, breathing masterpiece that no one had expected, not even Elena herself. Her fingers flew across the keys, not in chaos, but in perfect, passionate control. The notes sparkled, collided, and then melted together in harmony. It was joy and sorrow and freedom all at once. As she reached the final passage, she slowed down again. The music softened, returning to where it began. Gentle, simple, pure. The melody whispered goodbye, fading into silence. Elena let her hands rest on the keys for a moment longer. Her chest rose and fell with a deep, shaky breath. Then, she lifted her head. The audience was frozen. Some had tears in their eyes. Some sat in stunned silence. For a long, trembling moment, no one clapped. The quiet was more powerful than any sound. And then, a single pair of hands began to applaud. Another followed, and suddenly the hall erupted in applause. Loud, thunderous, unstoppable. Elena blinked, stunned. Her heart felt like it might burst. She smiled through her tears, rose from her seat, and bowed deeply. The lights shimmered around her as if the world itself was clapping. She had done it. She had taken something simple and turned it into something unforgettable. As she walked off stage, the echoes of the piano still lingered in her ears. The melody stayed inside her like a heartbeat she could still feel. She knew deep down that she hadn't just played music that night. She had shared her soul. And once a soul speaks, it can never be silenced again. For a moment after her final note, time stood still. Elena sat frozen at the piano, her fingers resting on the keys, her chest rising and falling like waves after a storm. The golden lights above her shimmered softly, and she could still feel the vibration of the last chord pulsing through the instrument, through her hands, through her whole body. The hall was silent. She dared not look up. What had she done? It was supposed to be a simple tune, a pleasant, quiet piece to fill a short moment in a long program. But she had lost herself in it, allowed it to grow wild, emotional, powerful. She had broken all expectations, forgotten the instructions, and followed her heart instead. A part of her feared she had made a mistake. Then, from the darkness of the audience, a sound broke the silence. One pair of hands clapping, then another, and another. In seconds, the entire hall erupted in applause that filled the air like thunder. Elena looked up, her breath catching in her throat. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, calling her name. The faces she couldn't see before were now glowing with admiration. Some were smiling with joy, others wiping tears. Her heart swelled. She bowed deeply, trembling, and smiled through tears she couldn't stop. Backstage, the other musicians stood in stunned silence as she walked past them. Some clapped softly, others simply stared. She could still hear the crowd's applause echoing behind her like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Mr. Dawson, the organizer, rushed up to her. His usual calm face was now bright red with excitement. "Elena," he said breathlessly. I don't even have words. You didn't play what we expected." "I'm sorry," she said softly, still shaking. I couldn't stop. The music took over." He laughed, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't apologize. You gave us something real. You gave us feeling." Those words struck deep inside her. Feeling. That's what she had wanted all along. When she reached the dressing room, she sat alone for a few minutes, still in her concert dress. Her fingers tingled as if the piano keys had left an invisible mark on her skin. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. The girl who once doubted herself, who thought she didn't belong here, who had promised to play something small and simple. Now she had just performed something no one, not even she herself, had expected. She smiled faintly. "Papa," she whispered. "I think you heard me tonight." After a while, she packed her sheet music and began to leave. But before she could reach the door, someone knocked. A young man stood there, one of the violinists from the orchestra. He looked nervous. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I just wanted to tell you. That was incredible. I've never seen anyone play like that before." "Thank you," Elena said, blushing. "It wasn't planned." He grinned. "That's what made it so beautiful." As she walked out into the night, the city air felt cold against her skin, but inside she was warm. The lights of the music hall glowed behind her, and she could still hear faint applause in her memory. Every step she took felt lighter, freer, as if a great weight had been lifted from her heart. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages poured in, from the academy, from students, from strangers. "Elena, you were amazing. That performance was magic. What was that piece you played? We've never heard it before." She smiled at the screen, overwhelmed. She hadn't even named the piece. It had just happened, like a story written in sound. Later that day, she received a message from a journalist who had attended the concert. He wanted to write about her. The girl who turned a simple tune into a masterpiece. She laughed softly. A masterpiece. The word felt too big, too heavy. She wasn't sure if she deserved it, but the truth was, it hadn't been just her. It had been life itself speaking through her hands. That evening, she went back to her small apartment. The familiar smell of old books and coffee greeted her. She sat down at her father's piano again, the one with the chipped keys and scratches. The silence felt comforting. She touched the keys gently and began to play again. Not the same piece, but something close to it. The melody was softer now, like a memory replaying itself. She closed her eyes and smiled. She could still see the faces of the audience, the moment when the music had taken flight, when she had stopped being afraid. For the first time in years, she felt completely herself. No masks, no doubts, no need to please anyone. Just Elena, the girl who loved to play. As the final note faded into the air, she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to be a masterpiece. It was just supposed to be me." And maybe that was what made it one. The following morning, the sun spilled through Elena's window, warm and golden. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept replaying the night, the lights, the music, the applause that felt endless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her hands on the piano, saw the way the audience had gone silent, felt that incredible peace that had filled her chest when the last note faded. But she also felt disbelief. Had that really happened? Was it possible that something so spontaneous, something born out of pure feeling, could move so many people? Her phone was buzzing again. Messages kept flooding in. Some from people she knew, others from names she didn't recognize. "Your performance was breathtaking. That wasn't just music, it was emotion. Do you have a recording? Please tell me someone filmed it." She smiled weakly, rubbing her tired eyes. She hadn't realized that Mr. Dawson had arranged for the entire concert to be recorded for the charity's website. A link to the video was already circulating online. With trembling fingers, she opened it. There she was on the screen. Small, almost fragile, under the bright stage light. She watched herself walk to the piano, sit down, and begin. The sound was soft at first, then deep, then alive. She saw her hands moving, her face glowing with focus and emotion. By the time she reached the middle of the performance, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't even recognize herself. The girl in the video looked fearless. She finished watching in silence. The final applause echoed through her speakers, loud and full of life. Elena placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "That was me." She sat for a long time, lost in thought. The music she had played had no title, no plan, no preparation. Yet it had become something people were calling the masterpiece. Later that day, she went to the academy. The hallways buzzed with whispers. When she walked in, conversation stopped. Then applause broke out, right there in the corridor. Teachers, students, and even the janitor clapped for her. "Elena." Mrs. Carter, her piano teacher, rushed forward and hugged her tightly. "I've been teaching music for 30 years, she said, her voice trembling. "But what you did last night reminded me why we teach. You didn't play notes. You played truth." Elena smiled shyly, tears welling up. "Thank you," she whispered. "It just happened. I didn't plan any of it." Mrs. Carter nodded. "That's what makes it real." Even Mr. Dawson came down from his office to see her. "We've had hundreds of performances over the years," he said, "but last night was different. We're calling your piece the Unwritten Sonata." "The Unwritten Sonata?" Elena repeated softly. "Yes," he said with a proud smile, "because it wasn't written, it was felt." She laughed quietly, the name sinking into her heart. It sounded perfect. Over the next few days, the video spread across social media. People shared it everywhere. Clips of her playing, screenshots of her bowing through tears. Comments poured in from around the world. "This made me cry, and I don't even play piano. It feels like she's telling a story without words. This is what real music sounds like." Elena tried to stay calm, but inside she was overwhelmed. She had spent years thinking she wasn't good enough, that her music was too quiet, too emotional, too different. And now, those same qualities were the very reason people loved her performance. One evening, she sat by her old piano again, the one from her father. The keys looked worn, the wood scratched, but it was home. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play the unwritten sonata again, just for herself. This time, she didn't try to make it perfect. She just played. The music flowed naturally, softly, like a friend returning home. Halfway through, she stopped and smiled. She realized that her masterpiece wasn't about skill or fame or applause. It was about truth. The moment she allowed herself to feel completely, without fear. The next week, a journalist came to interview her for a local magazine. They sat by the piano while the afternoon sun lit the room. "You've become quite the sensation," the journalist said. "Tell me, Elena, what were you thinking when you played that night?" Elena smiled thoughtfully. "Honestly," she said, "I wasn't thinking. I was remembering." "Remembering what?" "My father," she replied softly, "and all the things I never said out loud. I think the music said them for me." The journalist nodded, visibly moved. When the article came out, the headline read, "She was told to play a simple tune. Instead, she played her soul." Elena read it and laughed quietly to herself. She wasn't used to attention. But every time someone asked her for the secret behind her performance, she always said the same thing. "There's no secret, just honesty." That evening, she received a message from a little girl who had watched her video online. "Miss Elena," the message said, "I'm learning piano too. I was scared to play in front of people. But when I saw you, I decided to be brave. Thank you." Elena smiled through tears. She replied simply, "Play what you feel. That's all that matters." As the night grew quiet, she looked out her window at the glowing city. The world outside had changed. But inside she was still the same girl who loved a piano and a dream. Only now, that dream had finally found its voice. The morning after her story appeared in the newspaper, Elena woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. The light from the window spilled across her small room, and her table was full of flowers, gifts from people she didn't even know. When she picked up her phone, there were dozens of new messages. Some were from friends and old classmates congratulating her. Others were from strangers who had watched her performance online. "Your music touched my heart. I was crying while listening. It felt like you played what I've been feeling all my life." Each message made her chest tighten with emotion. She couldn't believe how far her music had gone, how something she played from her tiny heart had reached people she would never meet. But with all the praise came something new. Silence inside her. After the applause ended, after the lights went out, she found herself sitting alone again in her quiet apartment. The same piano, the same walls, the same girl. She should have felt proud, but she felt strangely hollow, like a wave had just crashed onto the shore and was now fading back into the sea. That evening, she sat by her piano and rested her fingers on the keys. For the first time since the concert, she didn't play. She just sat there, listening to the quiet. The world outside had changed. People were calling her a prodigy, a rising star, a piano poet. But inside, she was still Elena, the girl who once played just to talk to her father through music. Her phone rang suddenly. It was Mrs. Carter. "Elena, dear, how are you?" "I'm fine," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "I just wanted to tell you, the academy has been getting calls from across the country. Other schools want you to perform. Some want you to teach." Elena blinked, surprised. "Teach? Me?" Mrs. Carter laughed. "Yes, you. You've inspired so many. You don't just play notes, you play life. People feel that." After the call, Elena looked at the piano again. She thought about all the young students who might be sitting somewhere, scared to touch the keys, scared of being imperfect. Maybe she could help them find their courage, just like she once found hers. The next day she visited the academy again. Everyone greeted her warmly, but she could tell their eyes had changed. They looked at her differently now, with respect, with admiration. Elena, can you tell us what you were thinking during that performance? One of the students asked shyly. She smiled. Honestly, I wasn't thinking. I was feeling. That's the secret. Don't play to impress. Play to express. The students nodded quietly, and Elena felt something new, a calm sense of purpose. But later that week, she received a message that made her heart ache in a different way. It was from Mr. Dawson. Elena, a famous concert organizer in Vienna, watched your video. They're inviting you to perform overseas. Her heart stopped for a second. Vienna's, the city of Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert. The dream of every pianist. She stared at the message, her hands trembling. This was everything she'd ever wanted, yet part of her was afraid. What if it was just luck? What if she could never play like that again? She turned off her phone and sat at the piano. For hours, she played quietly, letting the notes fill the room, sometimes soft, sometimes powerful. No cameras, no audience, just her and the sound. As she played, she began to understand something. The true magic of that night wasn't the fame or the applause. It was the honesty. The moment she had stopped worrying about mistakes and had simply let herself feel. And that was something she could carry anywhere. To Vienna, to any stage, to any piano in the world. That night, she took a walk through the quiet streets. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and the sound of distant traffic hummed like a soft melody. She thought about her father again, about how proud he would have been. She whispered into the night, "I did it, Papa. I really did." When she got home, she sat down and wrote a small note to herself on a piece of paper. She pinned it above the piano. It said, "Never play to be perfect, play to be real." Days turned into weeks. People continued to talk about her, but Elena stayed humble. She gave a few interviews, smiled politely at compliments, and went back to teaching small classes at the academy. Her favorite part of every day was still the same. The quiet hour in the evening when she sat alone at her piano and played just for herself. No pressure, no expectations, no audience. And sometimes, when she closed her eyes and let her hands move, she could still feel the echo of that night. The night when a simple tune became her masterpiece, when she found herself through sound. Music had changed her life, yes. But more than that, it had freed her. She realized now that she didn't need a stage to prove who she was. Then, the stage had only shown the world what her heart had already known. And as she played under the soft glow of her lamp, she smiled. Because even though the concert was over, the music inside her would never end. Months passed, but the memory of that night never faded. Not for Elena, and not for anyone who had been in the hall to hear her play. People still talked about the unwritten sonata, the piece that had turned a shy pianist into a quiet legend. It wasn't just because of the music's beauty. It was because of its honesty. There was something pure in the way she had played, something that reminded people of their own hidden dreams and unspoken emotions. For Elena, life began to change in ways she could never have imagined. Invitations arrived from around the world, Vienna, Paris, Tokyo. Letters came from music students, teachers, and even strangers who said her music had touched their souls. She accepted some invitations, but not all. She was careful. Fame didn't tempt her. What mattered most was truth, that every time she sat at a piano, she would play with the same heart she had that night. When she did perform abroad, she carried her father's pendant, the little silver note, and touched it before every concert. It reminded her of why she began playing in the first place. One evening, in a grand hall in Vienna, she stood behind the curtain, waiting to go on stage. The audience murmured softly, the sound of expectation thick in the air. She could feel her heartbeat, calm and steady. When she stepped into the light, she She didn't see the crowd. She only saw the piano, black, polished, and waiting. She smiled and whispered to herself, "Let's talk again, old friend." She played the unwritten sonata, the same piece born from that small concert months ago, but now it sounded even richer, even deeper. The notes carried her journey, her growth, her peace. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause once more, but this time, she didn't cry. She just smiled, bowed gracefully, and whispered a quiet thank you to the piano, to her father, and to life itself. After the performance, a little boy approached her backstage. He held a small, worn-out sheet of music and looked nervous. "Miss Elena," he said softly, "I want to play like you one day." Elena knelt to meet his eyes. "Then promise me something," she said gently. He nodded eagerly. "Don't play like me," she whispered. "Play like you. That's how music becomes real." The boy smiled, and she saw in him a reflection of herself. The same spark, the same fear, the same hunger to be heard. She knew then that her music would continue through others, through anyone brave enough to feel, instead of just play. Back home, Elena continued teaching at the academy. Her classes were always full, not because she was famous, but because her students loved how she taught. She didn't start lessons with scales or theory. She started with silence. She would say, "Close your eyes. What does your heart sound like today?" Some students would laugh, others would look confused. But once they tried, they began to understand. Music, she told them, wasn't about perfection. It was about emotion. One day, a student asked her, "Miss Elena, do you ever get tired of playing the same song?" She smiled. "It's never the same," she said. "Every time I play it, I'm a different person, and so the song changes too." In the evenings, when the academy closed and the city grew quiet, Elena often stayed behind. She would sit at the grand piano in the empty hall and play softly under the dim lights. The sound would echo through the empty seats, gentle and warm, like a conversation between her and her memories. Sometimes she imagined her father sitting in the front row, smiling proudly. "I kept my promise," as she would whisper. "I played what I felt." One rainy night, she opened her window and listened to the sound of the drops against the glass. It reminded her of that first night when everything had begun, the night she was told to play something simple. How strange it was, she thought, that a simple tune had carried her so far. But perhaps that was the beauty of simplicity. When it came from the heart, it could move mountains. Years later, recordings of the unwritten sonata were still played in schools and music programs. Young pianists studied it, critics analyzed it, and listeners all around the world found comfort in its sound. Some said it made them cry. Others said it made them believe again. But for Elena, the greatest reward was something quiet, something small. It was knowing that somewhere out there, a young pianist might sit at an old piano one evening and begin to play, not to impress, but to feel. And maybe, just maybe, that was the true legacy of the tune. It wasn't the fame, the applause, or the spotlight. It was the reminder that music, real music, doesn't come from fingers or from paper. It comes from the heart. Elena grew older, but she never stopped playing. Her hair turned silver, her hands a little slower, but her sound, that deep, honest sound, only grew more beautiful. And every time she played the opening notes of the unwritten sonata, the room would fall silent, just like that first night. A simple tune, reborn again and again, forever alive in every heart that dared to listen.